I would go back to the piece of advice I gave new teachers I worked with, which is do the assignment. Like, do the thing that the tool is asking you to do.
Hello there, and welcome to today's episode of the Easy EdTech Podcast. My name is Monica Burns, and I am so glad that you're here to join me today. If you want to make the most of education technology, aka EdTech, well, you are in the right place. My goal has always been to help make EdTech easier and give you ideas you can try yourself, share with a colleague, or bookmark for later in the school year. Every Tuesday here on the Easy EdTech Podcast, you'll hear stories from my time in the classroom, the work I do now with schools and districts, and my travels to different EdTech events. Get ready for solo episodes where I share some quick tips and stories, and interviews full of practical ideas and stories from new guests each month. If we mention something you'd like to check out, make sure to click the link. You'll find it in the episode description or the summary area where you're listening to this podcast, or you can find every episode and all of the resources we mention by going to classtechtips.com/podcast. Or by going to classtechtips.com and just clicking on the Easy EdTech podcast button at the top of the page. This episode is sponsored by me. If your school or district is planning professional learning for this school year, I would love to join you. I lead keynotes, workshops, and virtual sessions for educators on everything from artificial intelligence in education to EdTech strategies that stick. Whether you're bringing me in for a full day or a 1-hour virtual session, we'll make it practical and packed with ideas teachers can use right away. Head to classtechtips.com and click the Work with Monica button at the top of the page to learn more, or send an email to hello@classtechtips.com. On today's episode, I'm chatting with Lori Cohen about the science of lesson planning in the age of AI. Lori is an education consultant, coach, and author who describes herself as a school system in a person, working with everyone from classroom teachers and coaches to district and state level staff. I had the chance to meet Lori in person at the ISTE Live ASCD conference this past June, and her new book, The Science of Lesson Planning, is all about the high-impact practices that truly deepen student learning. This is such a fun conversation, and I can't wait for you to hear how she thinks about lesson design, AI, and keeping the whole process sustainable. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to chat with you today about lesson planning, and not just lesson planning in the big, broad sense, but specifically the science of lesson planning in this age of AI. So before we get into all of that, can you share with us a bit, what is your role in education? What does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah. So I'm Lori Cohen, and I am currently an education consultant slash coach slash author. And kind of in my day-to-day, my day, every day is different. I feel like what I would describe myself as right now is kind of a school system in a person. I do a little bit of everything from working with coaches, working directly with classroom teachers, working with leaders, working with district and county level staff, state level staff, to improve systems for students at whatever level people are entering.
And that, idea of wearing lots of different hats and kind of seeing a lot of different things, right, I think gives us a lot to talk about when we think about lesson planning and kind of the way that AI may be used in different environments, right, that you work in and support. So you've written about professional development, about educator well-being, coaching, now lesson planning, right, and the focus of our convo today too. What drew you to write The Science of Lesson Planning, and what gap were you hoping to fill?
Yeah, I'm surprised it took me this long to write this book, because I think among all of the elements, sort of the pieces of education I'm most passionate about, have the most experience in, it's teaching and learning, and it's lesson design and pedagogy. I think when I left schools, I left as a school leader, moved into consulting and coaching. And so I think I was looking more at sort of the larger systems without and seeing where systems change could happen kind of more broadly. I think with the science of lesson planning, the gap I'm really trying to fill both now and kind of always in my time, working as a teacher developer and supporting especially newer teachers is I think we're handed a lot of what we could be doing. We're handed curriculum. Some districts write their lesson plans for teachers. Pre-service programs sometimes will just kind of give you templates to work with. But I find that we spend a lot of time thinking about classroom management. We spend a lot of time thinking about emerging technologies. We spend a lot of time thinking about sort of the latest sort of trend and whatever letters we're attaching to that trend as it comes into education. But I don't know that we as educators are doing enough of our own learning about how lessons are put together, what's happening in the brain and the body, how a sequence of a lesson, for example, makes the most sense to manage cognitive load, or how do we assess for learning? And how do we become discerning enough to know how to do that? And I feel like we are so bombarded with what's new, or the science of fill in the blank. And I feel like what we've lost is really the art and science of good design in the process.
And that's so much of what, I'm hoping we can focus on is, that science piece. And, what does the science part of the title mean to you? What's the research or thinking behind the approach that you take in the book?
Yeah, the science piece is a combination of neuroscience, cognitive science, and identity development, sort of like human development, and what has been sort of tested time and again in classrooms, whether through its, sort of long-term research, longitudinal studies, practices that have been done for eons. And so the science piece is really that balance of kind of all the ways into how we know a lesson is effective. So in every chapter of the book and every key feature that I break down, there's like an opening story, usually somewhere where I like messed up in my teaching. So a little self-flagellation, a little bit about like why this key feature, what's the neuroscience behind, say, psychological safety or engagement or assessment. Then we get into if the neuroscience and the cognitive science says this, then what does that look like in the classroom? So I provide stories and examples, and then what can teachers do? So a couple of sample tools that teachers can use as a jumping off point, not as the end game, but a springboard for their own thinking. And then finally, kind of the latest science is AI. Yeah. And where does AI fit as not as a stand-in for what we're learning about how the brain works and how students learn and how we can design, but where can AI be a companion to us in the process of designing lessons that get at these various key features that sort of bring the science together in a meaningful way?
Yeah, and there's a lot of conversation right now about AI and lesson planning. Some educators are using chatbots to draft lessons or generate activities, really just to save time overall. There's some tools that are designed specifically with that in mind, not just the chatbots, of course. From your perspective, where does AI genuinely support the lesson planning process?
I think AI has its place, and I've been involved in a lot of spirited conversations online about this currently because there's so many agencies, right, who are building tools that are free for teachers and wanting to be supportive. And so I don't think we're going to get away from AI. I think folks who are, the hardcore, shut the door, paper to pen. Okay, like I get it. I get why people have that proclivity. I probably would be somewhere in that camp at some point in time. But I think once again, as every sort of, emerging technology becomes mainstream, I think we need to learn how to work with and not against, but also in a discerning way. And so one of the phrasings that I got from a colleague of mine, Eric Hudson, he talks about human first, human last approaches to AI. And I've adopted that kind of as my mantra. With how we design, with how we teach, with everything we do related to lesson design. So for educators, what this means is, take a pass at the plan first, or work with your grade level team, or with your course team, or with your colleagues. Like get your own ideas out first. Like do your own study of the content or the approaches. Then I think there's the second layer that we oftentimes override, is who are our students? Like specific needs do our students have? What are our populations that we're working with? Also, how do we mitigate some of the biases that AI tools can sometimes promote? And so I think it's really about kind of a deep understanding of our students. And when we've done that kind of human work first, then we can prompt AI with, I think, more specific and more thoughtful prompts around, I'm looking to differentiate this lesson for, here's the specific content area. Here's kind of the range of where my learners are at. Here's the standard we're trying to achieve. Give me like 3 different options I can draw upon. So teachers really are sort of the drivers of what AI, what's possible versus like, hey, just give me a lesson, which I think a lot of people do. It's like, just plan me a lesson on this. But it's like, first of all, AI gives you too much. And so like your pacing's going to be off from the jump. But then, so I think it's about narrowing the prompt to be really specific to a particular need that maybe you've reached the limits of your own thinking.
Yeah.
And then I think a human last, right? Talking with your colleagues or returning to the plan. Will this actually work with my students? What do I need to adapt and adjust? And I think that dance I have found is probably where, and I've tried so many tools. I'm a geek about tech. I love trying out new things. And I found that continues to be, I think, the most sustainable way to be using AI in this work.
And I think that term sustainable, right? Really being intentional about how you're interacting with these. It's not just that one and done Google search print, right, type of piece, right? This is really something that requires that human in the loop, right, throughout that whole process. And, I work with a lot of educators who we do get a chance to, sit down and be thoughtful, right, about, right, these interactions. But then there's also the just quick prompt and stop there, right? As much as I try and say, like, this is only getting you, right, 70%, maybe, right? You really need to think about, right, where you are in that process. And I think that's such a great framing that you shared, right? If we want this work to be sustainable, right, not just a blip, right, of using a tool, that intention is so important. And so, you kind of alluded to this a bit, but I want to ask more directly because I think it's important, on the flip side of some of the powerful things you can do, where does AI fall short, or where should educators be cautious about relying on it when it comes to planning? I know the bias would be a part of this for sure. Are there any areas, that they might not think of?
Yeah, I mean, I think bias is probably top of the list. I think, the other place to be wary of AI is, I think, is an intentional discerning question. I think because, the tool, I mean, there's a phrase out there, kind of like the jagged terrain of AI. Like while yes, the tools are getting faster, smarter, better, they're still, at least, like, the tools are still going to hallucinate. It is a large language model. It is not a human being. And I think oftentimes when we're in dialogue with the tools, we sometimes feel like we're in dialogue with a colleague, and it can feel really useful, but it could also create a kind of dependence where we're not always getting the most accurate information. We still need to verify our sources to a large degree. So I think that's where we can kind of get stuck. But I think this third piece too, among the biases, the jagged terrain, is also the overriding of our own neuroplasticity. I think when we are always looking for the efficient thing, for the quick thing, for the fix it thing, it decreases our discernment. It decreases our flexible thinking, which I think now more than ever, there's been tons of studies done about how we've all kind of, the rubber band is like solely back in place. Like, we haven't stretched ourselves enough as learners in the past decade. And I think these tools are only exacerbating that potential for us to not engage in the same productive struggles, not have the same perseverance in our own learning processes. And I know these are more abstract ways I think about AI and AI tools, but I think these are real guardrails, for me at least, and how I work with schools around, this. Once again, it is a tool. We're going to be flooded for a while with it.
Right.
And, let's start with what's baseline here. Like, what do you already know how to do? What do you not know how to do? Where might AI fill that gap? And then how do you verify based on that gap that AI is filling?
And I think that aspect of, right, understanding, sure, right, there are some quick things you can do, right, that might have a place. I know for me, I always think of it like that might be your first way of feeling comfortable exploring this, and it can help you build some AI literacy, right? And then we can start going into these deeper, bigger questions, but we can't just stay in the, one and done kind of spot, right? Like there's so much more to go there that might end up, right, helping build that muscle, right, for learning like you're talking about. So if there's someone who, is running to an AI chatbot kind of with that like blank page, like I've got this blank page, I don't even know where to start. At least I'll get something and then I can refine it, right? Then I can make some changes. What should they be paying attention to as they review and edit what a chatbot gives them?
I would go back to the piece of advice I gave new teachers I worked with, which is do the assignment. Like do the thing that the tool is asking you to do. So rather than kind of only looking at it from a design perspective and being like, oh, I can cut this out or this won't work. It's like, okay, well, try it out. Like do the actual thing you've assigned to your students. I would suggest that for people who don't use AI tools at all. It's like
Totally.
if that way you can identify, I mean, granted, we have a few more years around the sun than our students, but at the very least, we can identify like where some of the pain points might be or where we might, augment some elements of our lesson. But I think that's the best way to test it is to try it, to be the user, on the other end of it.
And just that idea that we might read something quickly, right? We might get that output, make a couple changes, but then when we really step back and go through the steps of that lesson plan, we're like, wait, where's this part? Or this chunk is missing, or I actually can't get to this because this never happened beforehand. And if I had really spent, right, the time writing out that whole lesson and thinking through the process, I probably wouldn't have left that part out. But now I have more of an editor hat on. And I love that idea of taking something that you would have recommended in the past before AI and really applying it right to this situation. And your previous books focus heavily on professional development, on educator growth. How does strong lesson planning connect to those bigger themes of how educators learn and get better at their craft?
Yeah, I mean, I think the resounding thread across all the research I've done and the writing I've done is learning design. I think understanding how the brain learns and how we design based on that. And who are the learners in front of us? Who are the specific identity? Like, what are the identities, the backgrounds, the values, like the individuals? I think the biggest distinction with the lesson design piece and the professional learning and educator growth piece is andragogy versus pedagogy to, kind of at a distilled level that adults have more experience, come with histories, take a more critical lens and approach, want to feel like they have a problem to solve. Young people, as their brains are forming, as their identities are forming, it requires a different set of pedagogies, to attach to that. But I think, on the front end are the kinds of questions that we can be asking regardless of our audience, right? Who are my learners? What's the purpose of this lesson? What are the pathways into this lesson or this professional development? How do I give people time to play, to practice, to do, right? And to demonstrate what they've learned and then finally to transfer. Like those are the evergreen skills of good design, good growth models, good coaching. But when we're talking about, the tiniest humans versus the ones who've, been teaching for 45 years, I do think we need to attach a different set of expectations around the principles that we apply to learners.
Yeah. And, one of the things that I'm sure comes up when you are coaching and talking to teachers is just, the time that they wish they had or that their to-do list, right, is feeling really long. I think that's why a lot of people run to an AI chatbot because they're like, I have to do all these things. Can I outsource? Can I delegate? Can I get some help, right, with this? And, you write about well-being. So how does the way teachers plan, whether it feels, sustainable or overwhelming, connect to their overall well-being?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm going to answer through a systems lens and then bring it to the individual. Because I think oftentimes we put upon the individual the expectation that they need to solve it for themselves.
Yeah.
And, self-care, go to a yoga class, go grab a cup of coffee and do your work. And it's like, yes, yeah, I'm down for a good cafe and a yoga class. Well,
right.
In between, coaching sessions or work sessions. But I think there's a systems piece here around, what in our schedules, what in our sort of school systems can we adapt, adjust, amend to better support educators being able to do more in the school day, within that time frame. I think is sort of phase one of this. I think the second is to look at how we're spending our time.
Yeah.
Are we taking on too many initiatives? The answer is yes. Like, I'm just going to answer that right now.
Yeah.
It's yes. And so what are the priorities? What 1 to 2 to 3 priorities at most do we want to make sure are important for all of us, sort of at a systems level? So I think collective care comes first, systems analysis comes first. And then I think individuals within those systems, I think rituals really matter. Is there a time of day, thinking about, I know Ali Rodman in her work talks about chronotypes, for example, right? What time of day are you most productive? Are you most energized? Really understanding where we, sort of where our flow states are, and building in more rituals to do what we can within those flow states. I think taking advantage of, maximizing the time we do have, but also, every Wednesday evening after work, and I'm not everyone, but this is an example.
Right.
Wednesday afternoons was my planning time for my lessons when I was a teacher. And I would come home, make some delicious, beverage, coffee or tea or something. When I was younger, it was coffee. Don't know how I did that. But then I would take a 2-hour chunk of time and broadly plan my lessons for the next week. And of course, I was doing, sort of more adjustments on the daily, but I made it into a ritual and I made it feel sacred. And I think oftentimes for our well-being, it's a have to versus a get to.
Yes.
And so I would say that where and when we can think about the get tos versus the have tos, about what we get to do. How do we infuse it? How do we ritualize and infuse our routines and rituals with a kind of like love and care? And I know that for the teacher who's overwhelmed or is teaching in an extra class, that feels like a big ask. And yet I do wonder, how do we build, just attach it to an existing habit?
Yeah.
I think these little tweaks and these mindset shifts do help, at least acknowledge that the workload is huge, but during this 2-hour block of untouchable time, I'm going to do as much as I can, in this ritualized way.
And I love that there's, your emphasis is on both the system, right? And what an individual can do, right? We do have some agency, we do have some opportunity, but also understanding that there's some big external factors and the people who are managing those too, right, need to take all those pieces, like you said, the initiative, right, overflow that can happen in many environments, right, into account when we're asking someone to do, right, something new. So if a teacher is listening and wants to rethink their approach to lesson planning before the start of this new school year, maybe they're listening to this during the first few weeks of school, what's one thing you'd encourage them to start?
I would encourage them to start with building in time over the course of the school year for connections with students. They can connect through content. They could connect, in meaningful ways with we front load all of the relationship building in the fall.
Yeah.
And I think there's a way where we ignore it come winter and spring when the students are different. Right. Yeah. Their winter selves and spring selves are different. So I'd say no matter what content you're teaching, what age and stage, where are you infusing those opportunities to get students connected to the curriculum more, or you connected to your students more in a way that feels both organic, but also intentional? Because I think that's the piece that I think would support for classroom management. I think it supports for better lesson design. It increases students' connection to the content as well. So, get to know your students, but keep getting to know your students. Meet them newly every season.
Such a good reminder for someone who, maybe in that, few weeks in is feeling good to say, right, let me set a reminder on my calendar to send out a new student survey, to take a pause, right, and really reflect on where we're all at right now that the season has changed. So Lori, this was such a great conversation, super actionable for listeners, really something that I think they can take away, certain gems, right, that fall back into their practice. I know you have a book, right, that will be available for a listener soon, and other publications for them to explore. We'll link out to everything in the show notes so someone listening can go out and click. But if they're making like a mental bookmark as they're on the move and listening, where can people connect with you? Where can they learn more about your work?
Sure. I have a website, loricohenconsulting.com. That's the easiest place to find out kind of what's the latest and greatest, but also seem to be spending a good chunk of time on LinkedIn these days. And so if
Mhm.
people want to reach out through direct message or comment on a post, I'm most likely to engage there too.
Wonderful. We'll make sure to put those links so it's easy for everyone to find. But thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Monica. I appreciate it.
This was a very fun conversation with Lori Cohen, and I want to finish up like we always do with a few key points to make this EdTech easy. Take a first pass at your lesson plan yourself or with your grade level team before turning to AI. Ground your AI prompts in a deep understanding of your students, naming the content area, the range of learners, and the standard. Watch for bias and hallucinations in AI outputs and keep verifying sources. Walk through an AI-generated lesson as if you were the student to spot pain points and missing pieces before you teach it. It was lots of fun, like I said, chatting with Lori today. You'll definitely want to take a look at her new book. Remember, you can find the show notes, the full list of resources from this episode, including all the ways to stay connected with Lori, by heading to easyedtechpodcast.com and finding today's episode number 384. Also, there should be a link to the show notes right where you're listening to this episode, whether that's Spotify or Apple. So click right there and that'll take you to everything too. This episode is sponsored by me. If your school or district is planning professional learning for this school year, I would love to join you. I lead keynotes, workshops, and virtual sessions for educators on everything from artificial intelligence in education to EdTech strategies that stick. Whether you're bringing me in for a full day or a 1-hour virtual session, we'll make it practical and packed with ideas teachers can use right away. Head to classtechtips.com and click the Work with Monica button at the top of the page to learn more, or send an email to hello@classtechtips.com. Thank you for listening to this new episode of the Easy EdTech podcast. I love creating new episodes for you each week, but I could use a bit of help spreading the word about the podcast. Can you leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app? Spotify will let you tap on the stars, and Apple Podcasts will let you tap on the stars and leave a 1 or 2 sentence review. Thank you so much for taking this extra step. It helps other educators find episodes like this one when they're searching for EdTech tips.